doctor.
You have to get a permit.
Issue.
Okay.
It says that every last year's $8 a piece or something.
We're gonna call the meeting to order. The first order of business in this early part of the session will be progress update on the draft of Unified Development Code. And I'll turn that over to Garrett, Gail. Go through it with us?
Yeah, sure.
After we get, just so everybody knows, after we get everybody here at the table get satisfied with having answered their questions, then anybody out this way who wants to ask questions, you know, if we've got time, we're gonna go till 7. We've got another hearing at 7 that we've got to be. But we'll open it up for other questions. Garrett?
And hopefully some more people come in. We had several people express interest in being here, so hopefully some trickle in here as we're going along. But really what we wanted to do is focus this more on the commissioners. We've been, and don't think just because I'm the one up here yapping it, everybody at multiple levels has been involved in the development of the draft code we have now. Me, Gail, and Jim, and Dave, the public works director primarily, but we've also had the building inspector, we've had architects and engineers come in and take a look, sat down with some of them one-on-one. And we've been working on this for a long time now, and we're getting to the point where we're starting to wrap that up. We've got some more, a little bit more language to work through before it's a final draft that we're ready to go ahead and start sending out in its entirety to anybody. But we're getting really close, and what that means is this commission is on deck. So you guys will be up to that next. So we will have made all the changes we think are appropriate, and then it will be your turn. And full disclosure, at last I checked, the document is 266 pages. So how do you eat an elephant like that? Like they say, it's just one bite at a time. So the first bite is what you have, everybody has in front of you. Something to take home, chew on for a while, at least until we meet again. It's not a lot, even though it seems pretty thick. It really just covers the primary zoning districts that we're proposing to use. Most of them will be very familiar because they're very much the same as what we have now, but there are a couple new ones, a couple that we are changing. It also includes the bulk dimension tables for these districts, which is minimum lot sizes, heights, widths, depths, things like that, as well as the use tables, what is and is not going to be permitted in each one of these zoning districts. And so I have highlighted in yellow some of the more remarkable differences between what we had before and what we are proposing now. So you can look for those yellow highlights to draw your attention to some of the things that are new. And I'll cover most of those differences as I move along here. But as I do start going into some of this summary, first thing to keep in mind is, well, first thing, if you guys have questions or comments or opinions, please let us know, and we can try to spread that word around that the commission seems interested in us researching something like this or whatever. But also keep in mind that this is a draft document that we, in essence, borrowed. So it's not as though you'll see some of these changes and you may wonder, well, why are we doing that? In some cases, Gail or I may have a real good explanation because it's something we threw out there ourselves. But in other cases, it will be, that's what was in the draft that we borrowed. And so we stuck with it. We didn't have a real good reason to remove it. So we stuck with it, and we're going to go ahead and keep sticking with it until, you know, somebody on this body or on the city council says, hey, let's get rid of that.
Remind me which city did we borrow it from?
The city of Raymore, which is a city, yeah, comparable to us up in the Kansas City area.
Thank you.
So I want to start with an overview of some of the changes to residential zoning. The most substantial change is that there are going to be 2 new zoning districts available water and sewer available to these properties, but yet they want to develop for a single-family home or two single-family homes. And also, and we get a lot of requests like this, especially, like I said, on the fringe areas and in Brookline. You know, I just want to split off 5 acres and put a house, and I want to have a horse, and we don't have a lot of options for people like that. And there are certain areas of the city where development like that is appropriate. We don't have the facilities there. So this will allow development of this type to go on, and the rural estate is just a kind of a smaller version of that. In the rural residential, even a subdivision in the zoning district could occur with a minimum of 5-acre lots, 5 acres apiece, and you would potentially be able to not have to install enclosed underground storm sewers, also not have to do curb and gutter on those streets, and also not have to have water or sanitary sewer services to those properties. So it would be a very rural type of setting if it was done in a subdivision type of development. And it's a way to make that type of a subdivision feasible for development.
Just to make sure I'm following on, you said rural estate, but you
Yes.
meant residential estate.
Yes, I'm sorry. The next district is called rural estate, and that is for areas on the fringes.
Thank you.
Sorry, took your chair.
No, it's all right, let's go, right there.
The rural estate district is meant to be a little bit closer to our more urbanized, denser developments where we do have water and sewer. If you want rural residential, you can have that where we don't have water and sewer. But rural estate, you have to have the water and sewer. It's a minimum of 3 acres per lot. But you can also, in that district, perhaps not have to do enclosed storm sewer, curb and gutter. Because when you spread those out amongst those larger lots, that becomes very expensive for a lot on that long stretch of enclosed storm sewer, and where it's just not as necessary in these types of areas, this type of a development. So potentially you could get out of the curb and gutter and the storm sewer, but in rural estate, you have to have the city water and city sewer, because it is a denser type of development with that minimum of 3 acres. The agricultural district then will be changing. Right now, it's a minimum of 3 acres, and it covers anywhere from if you just want to live on it to if you want to farm pigs and chickens and everything else. So now it's going to be a minimum of 10 acres, and it will be reserved primarily for those areas where that type of use is more appropriate. So what this does for us is the RR and the RE give us a buffer, in a sense, between our urbanized, dense populated areas and the areas where you've got the pig farming and everything else, it's noisy and stinky. It gives us kind of a buffer between those two types of things, where you can transition from the urban setting to a more rural residential setting. And then on those very fringe areas, you'll have the agricultural districts that will reserve those properties in large tracts for future development 10, 20, 30 years down the line. So it'll serve as kind of a reserving zone, so to speak, to keep those properties there in large tracts. If it's ever going to develop and we ever get out there with services, it keeps those areas of the city ready.
Kind of protects your inventory.
That's right. We've got a lot of that in the city now since the consolidation. And what in essence we don't want to have happen is those areas way out there that maybe have a lot of development potential in the future get cut up today into a bunch of small lots on well and septic, and then that creates all kinds of issues for the future. What are you going to do with all those wells and all those septics whenever development does start to creep out that way? So that will help cover us there.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
I've never asked this, just curious. The way that you would enforce curb and gutter and storm sewers would be when somebody's building on that property, you would require them to put that infrastructure in?
In this case, it would be during subdivision development that we would require that.
Okay.
I guess.
I mean,
it
you've
would
got
be-
places all over town that don't have it.
Right.
I mean, you're not holding those people to, which I understand.
It could be that somebody rezones just a small parcel to one of these, and they're already on a street, so they don't need to build a street to build their house.
avenue, and have curb and gutter, storm sewers, other than ditch. Not gonna make sense.
That's true, right. But if those were ever, if that were ever to happen, it would be some sort of neighborhood redevelopment or war. Or a public improvements project, I mean, something where the city can. So sticking with residential development and moving on to some of the more dense, the R1M, R1H, and R1L districts, you won't see hardly any changes to those districts. Those are the districts in which we primarily have most of the city's development already located in those districts. We don't want to create a bunch of nonconformities that we have to deal with for years and years, so those districts will be largely the same. For multifamily districts, we will be limiting apartment buildings to 24 units maximum per building, which is something we didn't have before. And then if you're going to attach single-family units, like a row house or townhouses, those will be limited to 6 in one building. It's a kind of a non-monotony type of regulation, so you don't get long expanses of the same type of building across a long stretch.
How many are out there at that, apartment complex on, at, Republic Road?
24 each.
Are those 24 each? So each one, you could have a bunch of buildings, but you just can't have any building more than 24 units.
That's correct. Right. What's that?
It's units in that
Yes,
building.
correct. So that,
There's like 3 or 4 buildings up there, 3 at once.
More than that, yeah. It's three visible from the road.
right,
Stacked behind.
Probably
maybe 12.
I was gonna say 10 or 12.
Okay.
So that would still be allowable, and that seems to be the trend in apartment buildings, it's the 24 units, that seems to be the cost maximizer. Don't quote me on this, but I think if you go an additional floor, it requires an elevator, so that probably will limit to the 3 floors anyways. But like I said, don't quote me on that. For our residential districts, there will now be cluster development option available. So if you've got a 40-acre tract of land that has a stream or some woodlands on it, you actually will have an option now to develop that to the maximum density that would be allowed in that zoning district. So if it's currently zoned R1L, and you could potentially, that would allow for, let's just say, 50 lots on that. You would still be allowed to put 50 lots, but what we would do is, in exchange for the developer reserving a certain amount of open space, that stream or those woodlands, reserving those and not touching those, we'll let you do those 50 lots and scrunch them together a little bit tighter. You won't have to stick to the normal width, depth regulations on the lot. So, let's say it's, the normal regulation would be those lots have to be 100 by 100. Well, in exchange for you reserving those open spaces and not touching those things, dedicating them for that permanent use, we'll let you do 70 by 70 or 80 by 80. We'll let you scrunch those in there a little bit tighter, and in exchange, more open space, preservation of the existing vegetation, more visually appealing, more environmentally friendly. So hopefully it's a win-win. The county currently does this type of thing. I don't think they get a whole lot of takers since they started it, but I think they started it kind of right before things started going down a little bit. So once things pick back up, we'll see if people take us up on it and take the county up on it. Mobile home parks and manufactured home parks. We currently don't have any in the city, but we will have a zoning district, just like we do now, that will accommodate those. The difference now will be we'll actually have regulations for that zoning district. Right now, we don't. So if somebody were to get that zoning and want to put in a mobile home park, it would be very difficult to try to walk them through a pre-plat process when we don't have any standards. This will give us some standards for those mobile home and manufactured home parks. We'll now have standards for manufactured homes in residential districts, where they have these pre-manufactured homes that look a lot like just a normal home, but they are pre-manufactured. We now have standards that say you can have one of those if you meet these certain guidelines
that we cut out around that. I need to see that.
It's kind of like I said, it's.
The other
gonna be-
location.
Yeah.
The other location on the road, it's still.
They've been knocking at the door wanting to annex, they've got water and sewer issues over there, and that's just, the county would love for us to take it over. Police department is telling us, don't even touch it, because we're in there enough already covering Fort Greene County as it is, that
Yeah.
it's a mess.
That's where they had that pretty significant criminal fight, kidnapping, and
Probably more than one.
Home occupations in residential districts.
I can hear you.
Those will be mostly the same.
We can't hear
One thing that is
anything,
in
so it's
draft
not
now.
working being here.
Ron, you can sit up here if you want.
Go up there and sit.
If you're not using a PA system, then I'm hardly hearing anybody.
Just sit right up here.
I can't hear you.
You get out of hand, I'm gonna just hit you. You get out of hand, I'll just hit you.
You know, if you sit there for more than 10 minutes, Ron, you're gonna end up being a member.
A
You're
member.
gonna end up being a member, it's kind of,
Looks like they need
I'm
some.
not sure I want to. No, but I am interested in what's happening. I said it in the last meeting, and,
Well, just to recap, what you grabbed here, that's we just went over, Garrett just went over the zoning categories, all the different ones. Most of them are virtually the same. There's just a couple additions with the rural type residential districts and, here, take all different.
okay, thank you.
And then now you're going on to different home business occupations.
Well, I drive around, I go out Double M all the time, and I see we have a new bank, and 2 new buildings going in, and more being developed. That's great.
Yeah,
Good progress.
yeah.
So I know why this is coming about.
Hopefully to help.
Yeah.
Yeah, I try to get it.
Home occupations, that it'll be regulated mostly like it is now, with 2 remarkable exceptions. Right now, the draft prohibits retail sales from your home that includes walk-in traffic. We don't get a lot of those that get applied for right now, but we do get some where it's retail sales and they have walk-in traffic. The draft right now would prohibit that. Most of the retail sales, home occupations that are applied for are online sales, so there wouldn't be any walk-in traffic or some kind of catalog sales. But on occasion, we do get some that have walk-in traffic. So this would be a remarkable change if the draft is left as it is now. Motor vehicle repair is also expressly prohibited. It's really prohibited now, but full disclosure, there are several of them around the city. Some of you may get your cars fixed here. So keep that in mind. It could potentially affect those locations if this continues on into the adopted draft. And then lastly, for residential zoning, personal home storage, construction trailers, shipping trailers, like these pods that you see, the white storage bins that get dropped off and left in somebody's driveway or in their side yard and then hauled away later. Those will now be regulated and will be restricted to 45 days in a 12-month period before they have to be removed. So 45 days is the longest you can keep one of those at your place of residence without moving. The same goes for trash bins. Of course, the exception is going to be if they're associated with an active permitted building project. So obviously, if you're building a house, you'll be able to have your construction trailer or storage container there for the duration while the permit is valid, or until you're done building that house. So those would be the
that wouldn't
exceptions.
include dumpsters, like at a retail or a commercial
No, they would not.
site.
Right. So, moving on into the commercial districts. There are 2 districts that I want to hit on. They will not be new zoning districts. We have them already, just nobody uses them. It's the commercial office and the C3 regional commercial district. We have them right now, but like I said, they're not really utilized. We adopted them probably 5, 6 years ago, and it just kind of never took off on the ground. once we're done with this code, I believe we'll be moving into doing a new future land use plan, and hopefully we'll be able to structure that so that we get some more use out of these two zoning districts. The C3 being most appropriate for clustering around major intersections, major interchanges, where you'll be drawing regional types of commercial traffic, not appropriate to be located adjoining any types of residential uses. Commercial office, I would be different, that would be appropriate, closer to the residential uses, for primarily office types of use. For, attorneys, accountants, things like that. There will be one new, commercial district, that being the business park district, which I think will be a very, very good thing. It will allow for commercial and industrial subdivisions to be developed in a more coordinated and a more flexible manner. Right now, like we have in Brookline Business Park, you guys have heard a lot of rezone requests for that business park. They started out with a particular mixed zoning scheme, but once they had people interested in this lot or that lot, they found out, well, that zoning scheme's not going to work, so let's rearrange it this way. And then another one comes in for the next lot, oh, now we got to rearrange the zoning scheme again. The business park district would cover a wide variety of commercial industrial uses. It gets rid of the problem of having to buffer between this kind of patchwork zoning that we've got out there right now in this Brookline Business Park. It will make things go a lot smoother and will definitely help the developer and Gale in terms of bringing in businesses and being able to explain to them up front, you got the zoning, everything is already taken care of. You're not going to have to worry about this 45 or 60-day rezone process, because the whole park is covered in this business park district. So you don't have to worry about that. You pick any lot within the subdivision that you want. Jim can correct me if I'm wrong, but we were originally planning to have a battlefield overlay district, which I think we're not going to include, at least not at this time when we bring this forward.
It's got to be extremely complicated. The Battlefield has their own desires, which is pretty much anything Civil War related, and it's nothing new and really nothing is what they would prefer. So that wasn't going to work, and trying to coordinate with them and trying to come up with something specific that would meet with their approval, we just decided we're probably better off just not keeping that from moving forward on the code. We can address that at a later date. The code's already in place, have a number of safeguards in there already to keep that corridor as nice as can be. So we just put that off to the side for the time being and just concentrated on the rest of it.
We will be, however, having a Center City overlay district that will be proposed. Right now, there's a Main Street-based zoning district that's available currently in the city. Nobody has ever applied to have their property rezoned to that district. It could be years before we ever saw anybody actually do that. So instead, we're going to go with an overlay district that covers a stretch of Main Street here. It will narrow it down to what that Main Street district was supposed to cover, to a smaller area, and that will allow for development to occur that is suitable for an older downtown area where you have the buildings right up close to the street, parking areas in the back. So it will provide the flexibility necessary for these areas to revitalize and redevelop without hitting all of the road bumps that they would find in one of the conventional zoning districts. And it will also help to smooth out a lot of the problems we have with the patchwork of zoning down here. Hopefully that overlay will help cover some of those issues and make the redevelopment process here downtown move along a little bit smoother. As far as the uses, and this is one of the things you'll notice I highlighted in the use table for the commercial districts. Payday loan, check cashing, and title loan businesses, in whatever districts they are permitted in, you'll see that it has an S. That means there are certain special restrictions. It's permitted in those zoning districts, but there are special conditions they must meet. One of those conditions is they will not be allowed within 1,500 feet of any of the same type of business. So you got a payday loan store that locates here, you can't open a new one within 1,500 feet of that location now once that's open. We got a similar rule that's already in place for pawn shops. We'll be kind of just adopting that same rule for these types of businesses as well. And then, of course, if they're the type that, do the car titles or something like that, and they repo vehicles, they won't be allowed to display those for sale or sell them there at their location. Another change, kennel businesses, kennel structures, the actual structure, the building or the outdoor runs for the pets, they won't be allowed within 200 feet of a property line or within 300 feet of any residential zoning district. That's not a regulation we have now. That is something that will be completely new. Large shopping centers, those large.
Would that even be, even if the kennel was in conjunction with the vet?
No. Veterinary services are regulated differently.
I see here, you have veterinary services here on page whatever, commercial, and then you have kennel right above that.
Right.
Most vets have kennels.
In everybody's package, I've given you definitions in the code that help us tease through what's the difference, because I'm gonna have to do the same thing. What's the difference between the veterinary and the kennel? Hopefully, we can look into these pages of definitions to kind of tease that out. Veterinary services would cover care, observation, and treatment, whereas kennels cover boarding, breeding, and selling of animals. So if the veterinary clinic is also involved in boarding, breeding, or even selling, or rescue, where they're keeping the dogs there permanently until they're rescued by somebody, I think they would have to be then regulated as a kennel rather than as a veterinary service.
Almost every vet has a kennel attached, what I call a kennel attached, would be for boarding purposes. I mean, either the dog's sick or ill or whatever, and the dog's kept as part of the kennel, or they board dogs. I don't know, but, they keep dogs that are under observation.
I think in that case, the boarding would be incidental to the veterinary service, so we would
I
still
just don't want to
regulate
run
that.
vets out of service. At the same time, you don't want to have the problem of sticking them right up next to a residential area where the dog's parked.
Right.
Maybe we can add that into the definition, that it would be boarding or for incidental to the, main business or
Treatment,
whatever.
care, et cetera.
Yeah, to the,
Yeah, I don't.
Because you're right, that there are gonna be kennels, or vets are gonna keep dogs overnight, so I suppose somebody could split it.
Or even longer.
Or longer, yeah.
I mean, vacation
A lot of
time.
them do
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, so maybe just incidental to the main business.
Right. As long as care is still their primary
Sure,
thing.
I'm thinking of, I know Stinger's he's maybe in town now, down.
Over the railroad tracks.
Yeah. Is that for both?
Still maybe outside city limits.
I don't know now, they still mobile home park.
They're in the county.
Yeah.
I think they're outside.
Well, but I know he has a kennel, I don't know if,
What's the one over here by 60 and Elm Street, right?
he's retired.
Oh, okay,
In May.
that's close down.
So there's
that
something
one,
bad.
so it's residential.
But there are some that are like.
Daltini's.
Smith.
Oh.
There are some, oh, it's okay. They're like dog daycares, and that's why there's a big difference in that versus somebody, a vet who has the dog care.
Yeah, that's a good point, Don, I think we need to just make sure we put a little catch-all in there, so we're not technically driving somebody out of business.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or keeping you need good veterinary services, and you don't want to have to go all the way to Springfield to get your vet services. Because that can be a big hassle if you have animals.
Now, I apologize if this seems disjointed, we're going from kennels to auto repair to, I'm just trying to cover the remarkable changes. I'm just trying to hit the highlights in a short amount of time. So from kennels then to motor vehicle repair, something that would be new for motor vehicle repair that we currently don't regulate. There will now be a restriction, you cannot store an inoperable vehicle at that location for longer than 30 working days, not including the weekend. 30 working days is the longest you could have a vehicle stored there at an auto repair business. Now, is Gail gonna have Seth go and, keep tally? No, but if we get a complaint, like at Kirk's Customs, he's got his screen with trees and a fence. Nobody's ever gonna know if a car is there longer than 30 days, but there's a location on State Highway 174 that doesn't have the screening, and the neighbors will see if a car is just sitting there for month after month. They'll be able to call, file a complaint, then we can track, is this thing sitting there for longer than 30 days? If it is, we'll give them a notice to have that car either repaired or taken off-site until it can be repaired. So that will be a new thing that we don't currently have. And then the last new remarkable change in the commercial zoning districts, body art services, like a tattoo parlor, will not be allowed within 300 feet of a residence, daycare, school, or place of religious assembly, and they will be limited in hours of operation, those being between 7 a.m. and midnight. So they couldn't be open between midnight and 7 a.m. The university. So that's it for the commercial zoning district. We'll have new alternative energy regulations. I won't give a lot of the details on that right now, but we are getting more and more requests for that type of thing. And my assumption is as the costs go down on purchasing those types of systems, like windmill and solar installations, as the costs go down, which I think they will, people will become obviously more and more interested in installing those at their place of residence. So you could potentially have tall windmills, people wanting to put them in their backyard in a densely populated residential subdivision. We had one request just a couple of weeks ago for something like that. Currently, it's unregulated, and that can be a potentially bad situation. These things start popping up in people's backyards, and they're 24-foot tall, they make potentially a lot of noise. So we will include some regulations to cover those types of things, to limit them in terms of height, location, making sure the installation is done correctly, et cetera, et cetera. The last idea that we threw around among staff was to require a special use permit for any type of large installation, like a windmill or like a large solar system on your roof or something like that. Those property owners would have to come in and apply for that special use permit, so they'd have public hearings before you guys and then eventually before council to receive their permit.
Hold on. For solar array on your rooftop? I mean, where's the break?
It'd have to be, one panel is obviously not a big deal.
Seems pretty onerous to have to come in and have a hearing. I could buy into the windmill deal.
Right. I think that the only concern I've heard on the solar panels is if you get enough panels up there, the glare on the neighboring property can be.
Catch somebody's exterior on fire.
Right, something.
No, some kind of windows will reflect enough light if you have the vinyl siding, it'll melt the vinyl siding.
That's the only concern we've heard, so that's why we put it in there.
Yeah, we thought it might have an impact.
If that turns out to be true, then
You have trouble.
certainly be an issue.
Driving down the road too, sometimes.
I could get the overflying airplanes too, we get all the planes coming across the set, lines of fire.
And to be honest, I don't know enough about those systems to really.
All, I'm not Mr. Green, but, I don't think we want to stop people from trying to, be an energy efficient. Because that would make it pretty significantly difficult to do if you have to have a hearing. You're gonna have to go to a hearing, convince somebody that it's gonna be appropriate, it's not gonna do this or that.
Right. And I said on the roof, there are types you put in your yard or on poles as well, which could be a similar type of situation.
Didn't Nixon just thinking of that solar deal, but I thought that they did not approve that.
That was my understanding as well.
And I don't know what the reasons were behind them not approving that, but, and it was a company that brought that forward, right? And I don't remember which company it was, I didn't follow it that closely, but I think it was just last week that they said no. and I don't know why, but, I mean, it's just one of those deals where whether it's a wood-burning fireplace or any other futuristic thing that they come up with to heat your house and, but I agree with you, Chris, you know, the windmills especially, because those things do make noise and, you know, they can't come toppling down, and I could see where those are gonna be a little more intrusive than somebody putting solar panels up, but we need to put some sort of regulation in place just so we can control it a little bit, if nothing else.
Yeah, my comment was just be judicious.
Yeah.
I don't have any problem with regulating, I think, yes, you do need regulation on it, just, I don't know, I haven't thought about it enough, just don't make it so bad that,
Have you been reading that?
yeah, just, I mean, somebody wants to put a couple of solar panels up and it's not gonna flame the guy's house next door, it's, you know.
Well, you know, the one we're going to outlaw right away is that solar speed limit thing that the school put up there. I mean, that would be one that, you know, they've got a little solar panel and that thing operates and then kicks out your speed and, but yeah, as that becomes more and more prominent, it's going to be, I mean.
Well, they're gonna come down in price and it's gonna.
Yeah.
Or you could see, I could see the state providing tax incentives.
Actually, they're already on tax.
I was gonna say there already are,
So then,
but it's not cost efficient.
right,
For most
Yeah,
homeowners
right.
to put it in right now.
right.
And I think there's something to do with like the electric side of things, whether Empire will let you tie in or tap into their grid. And
Buy
they
back.
certainly are not buying back any power right now, they don't need it.
But that could change.
Yeah, and that could very well change tomorrow. Right.
Yeah, they're flush with cash, they've got the highest rates in Missouri. We could tie in, you could save all this the money by tying into CU and getting a cooperative agreement with CU and getting rid of that. That might be more problems than what's
That's another meeting.
They went through that, I think, before our time here, and I don't remember what all transpired, but I guess it was a mess.
There might be a hearing involved.
We're all,
Yes.
Off-street parking, I'll just hit a couple highlights here. You'll see a greater emphasis on pedestrian access, getting people from the sidewalk at the street to the front door of commercial buildings through the parking lot or along the side of the parking lot. We're providing pedestrian pathway to get from that sidewalk to the building so you don't have people dodging cars. I like to think I'm quick enough, I could dodge a car backing out, but you have people in wheelchairs or somebody like Ransom zipping through on a bike real fast. It's an added amenity, it's in some cases necessary for ADA compliance, not in every case, but you'll see a greater emphasis on the pedestrian pathways from the right-of-way to the front doors of buildings. Another change in the agricultural and rural residential districts, there's a provision in there where they will not have to use concrete or asphalt for their driveways. We get a lot of requests, people building on their 5-10 acre lots out on the fringes or in Brookline, and their house is set back 100, 150 feet, and they come in for the building permit, and we inform them that they have to put in a 16-foot wide concrete driveway from the right-of-way all the way to their house.
Which is not cheap.
Not cheap at all. We have worked with some people where they've used a chip seal application to try to make it more cost effective, but the code is the code on those. It's got to be paved, and most of them have paved it, and spent a lot of money doing that. We'll be changing that to allow for those gravel applications in those rural settings where it is more appropriate.
So when does that kick in for the common homeowner who has a gravel driveway yet? Doesn't kick into them?
That's correct, yeah. If you're in like the R1M district,
Yeah,
typical house in town.
there's a lot of the houses in town that have gravel
Right
driveways.
now, it does not include a provision or something like that. By the time we get it to you, maybe it will, but that I think will definitely be a point of discussion when we bring this forward for public hearing. As far as landscaping goes, we've never had a requirement for any commercial lots or even residential lots to have a certain percentage of the lot have to be landscaped or open space, green space, whatever you want to call it. We will now have that'll be 50% for the typical detached single-family lot, 30% for two-family, 30% for multi-family, 20% for commercial and industrial. How much more is that than what we were or a greater percentage be reserved with grasses and trees. We'll still have the screening and buffer yards. Side trees will be something we'll probably have to see some changes to, requiring more side trees, especially in residential subdivisions right now. If we don't see any other changes, we'll at least have changes to the types of species and variety of species that are required in residential subdivisions. Right now, like Jim likes to say, they put up a stick that dies a couple weeks later. It's not viable, or they put in the whole street the same species, which makes it subject to diseases and bug infestation. So we'll require at least a variety of trees and a healthier type of tree at time of planting to make sure they're viable, possibly more trees than just the one that we require now, in order to try to improve the aesthetic value.
Is that and I don't know, and that this is kind of a pet peeve of mine, because you drive through the subdivisions and if they're that big around and they have two little branches sticking out at the top, you know, I'm always used to 1.5 or 2 inch diameter trees, and at least a couple, 2 or 3. They're not a lot of money, but they can make or break what a subdivision looks like over time if you can put in a nice healthy tree and you put in more than one. And I don't know if that's a big issue or is it just me, but I can see where you don't want to take it so far where you got foundation plantings and all that sort of thing, but I don't see where it would be detrimental to the residential market by requiring a greater number of larger diameter trees, and not the big 4-inch diameter ones, but just something that's got a reasonable chance to live. And that just drives me crazy when you go through some of the subdivisions. You get a hot summer and then they're gone. The trees are gone and nobody comes back and replants them. They just pull them out and let it go. So.
The problem is that we get in the subdivisions that were built over the last 10, 15 years or so, primarily they had the clear cutting method where if there were existing mature trees, they got taken out before the subdivision development. So literally the only trees in some of these subdivisions will be those little sticks, and if they don't survive, you've got a treeless neighborhood.
Well, to some extent, when you look back down this way, everything's all pasture.
Well, that could be true too, yeah.
It was just pasture, so it didn't have
Right.
anything except on the fence rows. But you give a incentive to planting trees. A homeowner that plants a tree gets a lollipop. I mean, I'm talking about the city now.
No,
You got a building permit that you're charging for. You got, in some cases, somebody's putting in a new deal, they're putting in 2 or 3 trees that are satisfactory to the city that, you know, give them a cut on their building.
No permit?
Yeah, that's not a bad idea. Because sometimes that's all it takes, and you just.
But
you know,
it'll
all brother
benefit the
helps
whole,
us.
it'll benefit everything about the city to have more trees in there, and it'll make the house more sellable, and it'll raise, in the long run, raise your revenues, because you'll keep people in there, and you'll be having better property tax.
All right, that's a good idea, I like that.
I mean, I don't know what the incentive is, you guys figure it out, but I just.
So on developers' property, you're gonna have to require, if you want trees, you're gonna have to require them to put in a certain size. I did landscaping for a number of years, and that landscaping was the last thing they want to spend money on.
Yeah.
And they want it done as cheap as they can get it, right? So you get the 1 gallon of shrubs, the pencil thin tree.
Yeah.
So you gotta have an incentive for the developer to do it.
Yeah.
Well, and it's not, you know, they should have some responsibility to maintain the trees, because, you know, you can put a tree in, and you put it in anytime when it's dry around here, and if you don't water it on a routine basis, it's gonna die no matter what. It could be this big around, but it's still.
We have a certain caliber requirement now for the new ones. It's funny is, I know the 7 years I've been here, I've had several instances where we've had to go back and replace the trees. You just can't do that after a certain period of time. It's impossible to monitor
like, because part of what I was always used to is that a builder was required to do foundation, landscaping, and it wasn't just limited to a tree in the parkway and maybe a tree in the side yard or backyard. There was requirements to do foundation plantings. I don't see that being, you know, something voluntary around here, but maybe if you incentivize them somehow, it's not a bad idea.
We'll make note of that.
Yeah.
The time set.
But it could make a world of difference over the long term.
For subdivisions, of course, I think we've already discussed this with this group, but the planning process will change. Now we will have developers agreements where they'll put up a security for the whole cost of the improvements, and then we'll go ahead and give them the final plat so they can start selling lots, and then they'll start constructing all the public infrastructure, the streets, sanitary sewer. They just won't get any building permits until those things are installed, but they can go ahead and start selling lots since they have their final plat. The city will keep that security in case the developer goes away or belly up, whatever, then we will have money and funds that are secured for us to go in and finish out the subdivision. Adjoining subdivisions where you have significantly different densities of development, there will have to be now some transition between those two. So if you've got a large lot development and a higher density development goes in right next to it, that where those two developments are joined, there will now be some transitional provisions that the developer will have to provide. It could be a buffer with a berm and some tree plantings. They could do what's called yard matching, or if you've got a higher density against a lower density, on that one row of homes, those higher density homes where the two meet, they'll have to have a little bit larger lots, a little bit wider, in order to try to match what they're bumping up against. I think that will solve a lot of the problems we've had here recently in the last 10 years or so with high density developments going up against lower density single family developments. This is one I like in particular is developments where the rear yards of lots back up against a public street. And you see a lot of this along Hines Street as you go out east, where literally 10 to 12 inches off the sidewalk, you've got their back privacy fence for about as long as you can see. Now we're going to try to prevent that type of situation, or if they don't have the fence, you're looking right into their backyard barbecue as you're driving down the road, and whatever else they may have sitting in their backyard. So we're going to try to mitigate that issue by requiring a small strip of buffer yard. If you're going to have the backyards go up against the public street, it could include, there'll be options, could include a berm with shrubs or tree plantings. Whatever the case is, there will be some sort of buffer between the end of those backyards and where the right-of-way starts, and you've got people utilizing those sidewalks. I think it'll make it much more appealing. People will be more likely to use the sidewalks in those cases, especially bicycles, I think. Moving on from that issue, be a lot of changes in stormwater. Most of that's real technical, so I'm going to skip over that. But two major things that will apply specifically to this group. Right now, the draft includes that minor subdivisions. Right now, P&G does not hear minor subdivisions. They're all approved administratively. The draft now has minor subdivisions coming to P&G for approval, but minor subdivisions will be different. Right now, a minor subdivision is anything from a lot line adjustment to a lot combination to a simple lot split. These will only be true minor subdivisions where you have a large tract that has never been platted that somebody wants to split up for development. Those will come to P&G rather than being approved at the staff level, because those tend to be much more complicated. They do tend to have an impact on public services, and so we're going to bring those forward. All the easy stuff like the lot splits in already platted areas, the boundary adjustments, the lot combinations, those will still be handled administratively by the Director of Planning and Development. The other thing for P&G is we're now, at least the draft includes a site plan review process. Before you can get a building permit for a commercial development, the builder will produce, or the owner will produce a site plan that will be brought, first initially reviewed by staff for conformity, then be brought to this board for a formal approval. The details on that site plan will include building location, the types of facades they're going to put on in order to meet our new facade regulations. Whatever those are gonna be, we haven't hammered that totally out yet right now, but it'll have some details on that, points of access, as well as what types of landscaping they're going to apply to the site. And if you're thinking, well, if staff's gonna review it for conformity with the code, what's left for P&G to look at? Well, sometimes it may be nothing, but a lot of times, these owners, builders, developers will be maybe looking for a little bit of give and take, or the code doesn't apply very well to a certain situation on that lot. They're not eligible to go for a variance, but something's got to be done in order to make the regulations fit with what the builder's gonna do. So that will allow for those site plans to come here to this body for some review, formal approval, and perhaps some action on, suggestions on what can and can't be done.
And this was the one where we met with the architects, right, on, and we had, and part of the original code that we had used from Raymore had all sorts of different variations on the facades and how the building is designed, and we took it to an architect here, took it to a number of different architects, but one in particular looked at it, and they have some issues with that, and they're coming back to suggest some other language that will not be so restrictive and give us more flexibility on how these buildings can be designed. Because the ones out of Raymore were a little more restrictive, I thought, and had a lot more detail into it, and would be much more difficult to try to interpret what would be passing and what wouldn't be. So they have been very, very nice in working with us, trying to come up with some language that gives the city more flexibility, but still allows for you to get something of quality. The people complained last meeting about metal buildings, and not all metal buildings are necessarily for design, for architecture, and sometimes they're appropriate, and sometimes they're not. And we just don't want to get ourselves in a position where we got a lot of good development going, we don't want to stop it in its track by doing something that's too restrictive, so.
I think we also want to ask them to do terminology to where it was more in layman's terms, because some of these definitions of the type of facade that they were requesting, nobody knew what it was. So.
We don't want to take, you don't want to jump so far where you all of a sudden go from maybe being too loosey-goosey to being overly restrictive, and the next thing you know, nobody wants to come to Republic. So we need to be extremely careful, and that's why we reached out to some people that really know that business.
I apologize for taking all the time, but if you guys do have any input or suggestions or questions as you go through some of this won't be the last bite that we feed you on this one for sure. But we are very interested to hear what they are, because, yeah.
Real quick, this piece that you and Gail each have to kind of summarize all of these changes, is that something that we did,
Yeah.
or should not be differently?
No, this is not, these are just.
This is just your notes to help,
Talking notes.
to
Yes,
talk
I
about
can.
the remarkable differences and things like
Right.
that. That would kind of help me to go back and forth on what I have, what we're going through.
I can supply you with this, and I've been working on it, it's not done yet, and hopefully this will be useful too, a copy of the complete document that will have color-coded highlights for this is what's different. That way, as you're going through it, you'll be able to see, okay, this is a new thing we weren't doing before, and you'll be able to see, okay, all of these 3 pages is exactly the same as what we did before. I'm not going to spend so much of my time on this, I'll focus on the highlighted stuff. Hopefully that will help, as well as we get closer to having a formal public hearing.
One other thing that we might want to mention too is it makes it a little easier to eat the elephant, so to speak. Raymore has said that, there's no way you can get this thing perfect up front, and I don't know if you can ever get it perfect. It's always a working document. So, we're just trying to hammer out the issues that are the largest ones that we see. It created some heartburn, not only for the developers, but for the process as well.
Come join us.
And we had purposely from this meeting left out a couple of there may be smaller issues, but there are controversy like parking in the yards and signage and a few other things that are going to be a whole discussion all in themselves. And amongst ourselves, we kind of went back and thought, well, there are some people that we've talked to, some on city council that would like to go, you know, more extreme. And then there are some that think, well, maybe we shouldn't do that. So I think our thought process is to present something that's not as radical, maybe take a couple smaller steps in getting us to where we need to be. Otherwise, we're afraid we can get bogged down on what's really important to help with development, get bogged down in some of these other smaller issues. Not that they're not important, but we need to somehow tackle the main portion of this before we get into that other stuff. So, but it's coming.
Anybody in the audience have any questions?
We're out of time.
You've got 3 minutes. You've
Um,
got 3 minutes.
Okay, regarding the tree, is there any way, if, I don't care how big the tree is, if you plant it in the middle of July, maybe August, that sucker's probably not gonna live unless you give it intensive care. So is there any way that you could tell these builders that you can wait until the proper time to plant it in fall?
Absolutely. Actually, we do that now. Sunny will actually give them a temporary permit as far as the completion of the project is concerned. Require everything to be completed, but if it's in the dead of winter and the planting season's not adaptable, then he does allow for that provision. We can certainly even extend that and make a recommendation for that.
Ransom just mentioned possibly having something like a small
Escrow.
security or an escrow.
I mean, I thought I heard somewhere you said you were gonna hold money back on a development to ensure a percentage, a retainer, so to speak, to make sure that the thing was completed.
We've got that in there for land disturbance and for public infrastructure, but not for landscaping.
Maybe we should do that, yeah, performance
Yeah.
bond for landscaping,
You could just add it to the performance bond.
or add it to it, yeah.
Again, you might want to look at the cost of that, because it could be, I don't know the business, I don't know.
Excuse me, I know Springfield, a couple of years ago, was involved with the Tree City USA. There might be some criteria that you guys can look at for the Unified Development Code that would help you on that.
Tree City USA.
And that is something we'll be looking for if we've got some landscapers, somebody with experience that can lend a hand, because the code document now refers to, like a landscaping manual where you can find the allowable types of species and this type of thing. I don't know about Gail or Jen, that's not something I'd be very good at, so any help we can get, I'm not a landscaper, is what I'm trying to say, I don't know. about
One
that.
sweet gum tree per square mile.
Zero per square mile, yeah, there we go.
Those gumball trees?
Yes.
Nowhere in the city.
Nowhere in the city, nowhere outlying them.
And if anybody wants to come and rake the gumballs, I have 2 of them in mind that I rake 20 or 30 bags a year.
I think regarding the Tree City, I worked with Jared on the trees over there at Miller Park, and I think he has quite a bit of information that we got regarding the Tree City, so you might start there.
Any other questions, comments?
I don't have a question, but I will make a comment. When I moved here, there was not one tree on my property, not one. Now, if you look at it, there's trees all over the place,
Well,
thanks to my
look at my
late husband.
I moved here in 1980, the very same thing. I
But let
planted
me tell you
20 or
something.
30 trees.
Those trees have caused me more grief than anything else, because we had lightning strike 1, ice storm take 2, and I've got 2 right now that I expect them to blow over on my house anytime. But if I had it to do over, I would not plant one tree. And I don't think that, I'd have to be told, if I don't want a tree in my yard, I don't think I ought to have to be told that I have to have one by you guys.
Talk about new construction, though.
Well, new construction or old construction. If you don't want a tree, you don't want a tree. Just,
I want gravel instead of grass.
Tucson, Arizona is a good place.
Yeah. That's the way I look, that's the way I look at trees, because they've cost me lots of money and a lot of grief.
To Ms. Bull's point, this will be the last thing. We did consider, may still consider an option where you're allowed, you have to have so many trees per lot, but you can cluster some so that there are some lots that can be allowed to stay clear of trees if there are potential buyers who don't prefer it. That way there's still the same number of trees within the neighborhood, just a little bit clustered maybe in one area or spread out a little bit differently.
Possibly look at landscaping option there.
Don't get me wrong, I like trees, but I don't like them on my property.
Just don't buy a new house then.
We need to move to the hearing that we have advertised for 7 p.m. I'm going to move, thank you, Gary. Thank you. Move to the public hearing, PC item 14-01, public hearing concerning an application to amend the zoning code and official map by changing the classification of approximately 11 acres owned by Wood and Houston Bank and located at 1495 South State Highway, M from general commercial C2 to light industrial M1. Garrett? Yeah.
Just an overview at this point?
Yes.
Okay, the 11 acres that we're talking about is owned by Wood Houston, as mentioned, by Ransom, and the actual location of this is out in the Brookline Office Park area. It currently is zoned for C2, and the application and applicant have requested now for a change to M1.
Anyone out in the audience wish to speak on this hearing? No one coming forward, I'll close the hearing. Last go, I'll close the hearing. All right, move to the regular session. First item of business is the approval of minutes of September 16th, 2013 Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. Make a motion to approve. George.
I'll second that.
All right. Any discussion on the motion?
One minute. We had an overview by Garrett Thomas, and the overview was by Garrett.
Are you making a motion?
Well,
Be the first thing.
we have the discussion on the motion. Will you accept that as a? Will you second that? All right, we all clear on what the motion and the, as amended is?
Yes.
Roll call.
Yes.
Ransom Ellis.
Aye.
Bradley Bauer.
Aye.
Brian Vandershaft.
Aye.
George Norris.
Aye.
Jeff Respite.
Motion carried. Okay. This time for citizen participation. Anyone that wishes to participate on an item that we haven't already discussed or the item we're about to discuss, then feel free to come forward now, and you've got our ears for what they're worth. No takers tonight.
I'm Gary Wilson.
No old business, new business. PC item 14-01, discussion and possible vote to recommend the approval of an application to the zoning code official map by changing the classification of approximately 11 acres owned by Wood Houston Bank and located at 1495 South State Highway, EMF, general commercial C2 to light industrial M1. Thank you, Ron.
Thank you.
I'll go ahead and do a briefing then on the 11-acre tract that is being considered for rezone. As we had mentioned previously, Rinkoff and Monson Inc. Are the applicants for this rezone. It's for 11 acres in the Brookline Business Park area. You'll see previously it might have been listed as tract B on various
illustrations of the business park, but considering that its close proximity is to the business park, the track's not actually platted within that subdivision. The property currently contains an unoccupied residential dwelling as well as 2 accessory buildings, just to give you an idea of the location. In your packet, you do have a map that reflects that location on M. Primary transportation service to that particular area would be Highway State NM, but it would also require a permit from MoDOT, which the applicant would be in the process of applying for. The West King Street has been designated by the city as the local commercial class thoroughfare into the Brookline Business Park. So the site's likely to flow or have traffic flow off of NM onto King and into that particular location. Most of the commercial traffic that would be coming into that area is likely to flow from I-44 north down into the James River area. And transportation facilities are suitable to support that type of traffic generated from the light industrial use that they are proposing for doing so. The adopted land use plan also shows that entire area appropriate for that type of land use. It's basically surrounded by general commercial, and is also light industrial to the south and agricultural to the east. The site is currently served by City of Republic Water and Sewer Services, so they have adequate capacity for this use. And for your information, we've also included, as I know you're familiar with from all the other meetings, a listing of what is allowed in the M1 light industrial zoning category. So staff recommends approval of this rezone based on the information that we have given PNC County. Be happy to address any questions.
Are the applicants the owners of the dwelling on the property?
The applicant currently is not the owner, but has a contractual agreement with the owner, which falls in compliance
So
with
they
the
know
guidelines.
about the possible rezoning?
Absolutely. Wooden Houston Bank, again, is the owner of all of that property out there. The house, oh, excuse me, the house itself, I'm sorry.
Right, I understand, I just want to make sure,
Yeah, I
you know,
missed that.
whose dwelling it
Sorry.
was knew
Yes,
of the
yes,
rezoning
thank you.
going on.
I thought you meant the actual Wooden Houston.
And all this is in one already.
Yes.
I hate to ask, but what's it gonna be?
At this point, I can say as much as it is a light, you'll recognize the name, it's a light manufacturing, spice distribution area. And they make their own spices as well. And package private label for snow together. Spice touch.
Spice, huh? Kind of like Dune? You know your science fiction book? You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Okay.
But you will recognize the name.
You know what I'm talking about?
If we're ready, I guess. I'll make the recommendation to approve through city council. Is that right? For the approval to amend the zoning code and official map by changing the classification of approximately 11 acres owned by Wood and Huston Bank located at 1495 South State Highway MM from general commercial C2 to light industrial M1.
Wow, you did that.
Thank you.
Good, that was-
That was excellent.
I'll second.
Thank you.
You too.
All right.
You assist.
This is important.
Any discussion on the motion?
Jeff Eslin. Brian Vandershaft.
Aye.
George Norris.
Aye.
Nancy Melish.
Aye.
Did I already say Brad Ballard?
Aye.
Thank you.
Just kind of random.
Well, I had my list wasn't right.
Have any other motions that anybody would like to make?
To adjourn.
There's a second? Second. I think everybody voted yes on that. But
Boswell?
Yeah.
Okay. Brian?
Aye.
Red Bone?
Aye.
George?
Aye.
Jay?
Aye. Don't wanna disappoint anybody. We need to fill out that.